So, I hope you're not very tired already. So, my name is Athina. I'm an associate professor with the School of Architecture in Perspekti fler SELANİK. And with my presentation, I will try to continue to take over the same where I stopped. And in the first half of the presentation, I will try to explain a little bit the evolution of the city until today, so that you don't understand. Well, I will make a brief review, of course, of the main stages of the evolution of the city, so that we can understand a little bit why the city looks as it looks today. And in the second half, I will try to talk about some of the latest urban interventions that have taken place in the last 2 decades, I would say. And also to discuss a little bit the main issues that are under discussion for the present and the future of the city. So, right. So, about the SELANÍK, if we could schematize a little bit the stages of urban development, so we could say that from the period until the 80-70, the city remained within its walls, mainly introverted clusters, as Rich has talked about that. From the 80-70, when the first efforts of modernization started to take place out of the Ottomans, that is during the Athina period, until the end of the 20th century, that is the 1990s, we could talk about a compact monocentric city. And from the 1990s until now, we had the first signs of the urban sprawl phenomenon, and we will talk about the dispersed polycentric city. Here you can see the evolution of the scale of the city from the 80-70 to the mid-2000s. And so, although as Vasilis Kolonas said, the first efforts to modernize the traditional city were made under the Ottomans, the real transition from the traditional to the modern city, not only in terms of the urban form, but also of the urban form, but also the social structure of the city, took place after the reconstruction of the city after the 1970 Great Fire. This fire gave the opportunity to totally change the image of the city, the urban form, the organization of the city, and also the socio-economic distribution of the classes. So this is a plan of the 1960s, this is a plan of the 1916, when Thessaloniki had already been integrated in the Greek state, and it was the base of the Orient Army during the World War I. Here, in the west part of the city, was the basis of the army. Here you can see the city center, and here is the eastern part. And for this neighborhood, it was the one Vasilis Kolonas told us about earlier, having district. So, the city was like that, and in the August of 1970, there was a great fire that started there in the western part of the historical center, accidentally. Well, there are historical sources to say the contrary, but accidentally there was a fire. It was very hot. There was a big disastrous period at that time. There wasn't many fire stations, at that time, so it wasn't very easy to stop the fire. And so the fire destroyed. This is another photo of the city before the fire, and you can see that it's very densely built up. Only this area, which has been rebuilt after the 1890 fire, seems a little bit more, say, less densely built, with a more orthogonal and more regular form. But the rest of the city has this a little bit chaotic, we would say, form, and very densely built up. So the fire destroyed most of the historical center, almost 2/3 historical center, and most of its monuments, only some of them they were touched by the fire. Here in the plan, you can see the exact area that can be burned. So the fire gave the opportunity, say, to the state, the government at that time, which was Venizelos and the liberals, and the government, to replan the city and to totally change its traditional structure and the socio-economic and spatial, say, modernization of the city to take place. The plan was prepared by an international committee and under the French architect, a very well-known French architect, whose name is Ernest Ebrard. Ernest Ebrard was graduated from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So we would say that in fact he transferred all the ideas of the then emerging town planning discipline of that time in Greece, in SELANÍK, all the ideas about the zoning, about the tailored function of the city, but also the classical, say, urbanism of the 18th and 19th century in a mythological level. So he prepared the plan for the whole city. I mean, even the areas that were being built, but also for the extension of the city, with a vision of about 350,000 people. And in this general master plan, we can see, in fact, the zoning. That is, we have the center, which would be the administrative, cultural, economic center of the city. In the western part, where the big infrastructure are already, that is the station and also the port, he also organizes an industrial area and also housing residential areas for the low-income social strata. And then in the eastern part, where there was already this, say, residential areas for the wealthy people, the district, we have residential areas for the middle class and for the upper class of the city, and also here a zone for recreational zone at the end of the small. So, but of course there was a detailed plan for the historical center, which was destroyed by the fire. And here also you can see the limits of the burnt up area. There are the new plots also. So, as I said earlier, Ebrard introduced all this classical urbanism in the 18th and 19th century. So we have this monumental tracement of the axis used as focal points the main monuments of the city, the Byzantine, but also the ones of the Ottoman period, like the hammams. There is a very ornate hierarchical street system. He introduced also the boulevard, the urban boulevard, as a type of street with the alleys along the streets. Also a green belt around the city center, also for preventing the fire, but you know, it was one of the tools the urban planners were discussing at that time. And also it proposes a big axis in the east of the historical center, where he concentrates on the recreational uses, athletic sports facilities, and also the university here, kind of university campus, which redesigned almost a decade later in a more detailed manner. Another interesting point is that he preserves the upper part of the town, where in fact it was mostly during the Ottoman period, the distribution of the different most important ethno-religious groups, where in fact here near the market, the Jewish community, here in the eastern part of the historical center, the Christians, and here in the upper part of the town, they were mostly the Muslim neighborhoods. So he preserves the upper town, the Anapoli, as we call it in Greek, untouched for, we would say, touristic reasons, like a picturesque, say, old settlement. Here's one major element of the plan is also the design of this axis, which was designed as the heart, we could say, the heart of the new modernized city. And along this axis, which starts from the sea and goes up to the upper town, we have two main squares. The one here, which is the today Aristotle Square, with a beautiful view to the Olympus Mountains on the other side of the bay. And here he locates the bazaars as a reminder, we would say, of the old Oriental market. And here he locates in fact, the civic center of the city. That's the concentration of all administrative functions around the square. And it's not, we think, by hazard, but in fact, he designed the civic center on top of the Roman Forum, the ancient Roman Forum. And that's why it was never constructed, because in fact, when they started to dig to build the Justice Palace, they found the ancient Roman, so it was never built. Here is the more detailed plan of the civic center, with an arch here at the end of the coronation of the axis. And some plans of the Ebrar, I will pass it quickly, for the piazza of the city, for the civic square, and also another element of the plan, of the grand plan, was the imposition of a certain type of facade, the façade ordonnancée, as we say in French, for along the main axis, but also around the main monuments, visited monuments. Another very modernizing element of the plan is also the introduction of as a structural plan, or as a structural element of the plan, the apartment block. So this apartment block was going to replace the past a little bit chaotic, labyrinthic neighborhoods and urban neighborhoods, the mahallat. So the apartment block becomes the main organizing element of the new modern urbanized city, and these are the plans of the facade for the representative urban block. This is a picture of Aristotle Square today. Of course, finally, the facade ordonnancée were imposed everywhere, where had passed, but only along the Aristotle axis, and part of it was designed in the interwar period, and the other part after the Second World War. And here are some pictures to show you this, the term of the Byzantine monuments as focal points in the city. And here you can see the transformation of the urban form from the urban tissue from the mid-19th century to after the decline of the city after the fire. In fact, what strikes is the biggest percentage of open spaces. Before we didn't have, say, public spaces in the city, but now you can see the one. So during the whole interwar period, this is an aerial photo of just before the Second World War. There was the reconstruction of all the burnt area here, and only the public buildings haven't been built, as I told earlier, and it will be only after the Second World War that they will discover the Roman Forum here. Well, it's very interesting also the reconstruction operation in terms of in economic and legislative terms, but I can't go any further on that, so if you want, we can discuss it later, because the first legislation tried, in fact, to prevent the speculation on land and also help the initial owners, landowners, to stay within the historic center. But finally, as the government changed, there was the defeat in the Greco-Turkish War, there was another government, Venizelos lost the elections and all this. Finally, we would say that the speculation, that the replanning of the city was a speculative operation, finally, and all the poor people were thrown out of the center, and it was only the ones that could finally buy the new plots in open auctions and not in closed auctions as it was first initially recommended. They had the power to say buy the new plots and construct the new buildings in the center. So this is some images of the interwar period and the new buildings, and this, let's say, eclectic architecture of the first decades of the 20th century, and in some of the major urban streets in the historical center. This is the Chilski Street, from where he visited Thessaloniki. It should know Chilski Street. It's the street which is parallel to the Old Quay. And some of course, a number of these interwar buildings are still preserved, and you can still see them in the contemporary city, although the greatest part of them, the greatest number of them, can be replaced after the Second World War by the new polytechnics. I will talk about it just afterwards. So, another, of course, very important element of the evolution of the city during the interwar period was the refugee rehabilitation programs and the big expansion of the city in the 1920s and the 1930s. In fact, the main periods of urban growth and expansion of the big cities were first in the interwar period, after the arrival of almost 1,100,000 refugees in the country because of the change of population between Greece and Turkey, and of course the second big urbanization that was after the Second World War with the internal migration to the big cities, Athens and Thessaloniki. So, in Thessaloniki, in fact, in Thessaloniki, we arrived, well, almost every Greek city accepted refugees after 1923, but Thessaloniki maybe received most of them, because almost 1,100 refugees arrived in the city, and that's why we call it also, it has been called also as the refugee town or refugee mother. So we have, with the arrival of the refugees, we have a rapid increase of the country's population and mainly of the urban population. So two major programs were put in order to rehabilitate these refugees, an urban rehabilitation program and a rural rehabilitation program. And these programs, they had great, say, implications in the expansion of big cities in the 20s and the 30s, and also, of course, of Thessaloniki. In this plan, you can see the initial establishment of the refugees within the city, either in public buildings or the temporary settlements that they were made in order to shelter them. And here, in the two following plans that I will show you, we have the location of the first, well, in fact, in Thessaloniki, they were built 126 urban, semi-rural, and rural settlements around the city, in the edges of the city, and also in the wider area, in the wider periphery. Of them, 65 were rural and semi-rural settlements in the wider area of Thessaloniki. You can see them in this plan. And the 61 were very urban or semi-rural settlements in the edge of the city or in the immediate peri-urban area, here with the red color, you can see. And as you can understand, this marked a rapid and very rapid expansion of the city, made in fact this program to shelter the refugees was the major, program of social housing production, public social housing production. Because in fact, many there were different ways to produce these settlements. There were some settlements that were constructed immediately by the state. Others that for which they allocated the land and the plants, but then they were giving money to the refugees in order to build the houses themselves. And of course, a part of the refugees they found, I would say, a safe, a construction way to shelter them. So we had also some unauthorized settlements around the city, or within the city, actually. I will just show you two very characteristic examples. This is, for example, Kalamaria. Well, I show you here. This is this part, the south part of the city. It's called Kalamaria, which was formed during the 20s and 30s by constructed almost 15 different refugee settlements. And also this one, Tumba, which is in the eastern part of the city, southeast part of the city, which is integrated in the municipality of SELANÍK today, and it was the major, refugee settlement of that period. So I will pass quickly some images just to understand. These are some of the plans that were prepared very quickly. All these settlements, they were constructed, you can imagine, in a period of 5 years, you could say. They are very simple plans, with mostly adopting the regular, plan with the regular urban blocks. And of course, there were certain types of houses, like this one that you can see here, double houses or almost 4 houses together, in order according to the needs of the refugee families. And this is Cuba. Down you can see how it looked like in the 1930s after the construction of the state housing, and here in the 1960s before the anti-piracy system arrived with so the small refugee houses were replaced by the big apartment buildings. So that was an introduction to the post-war mass construction period. This is an aerial photo of the 1951. As you can see, well, we can distinguish in fact the part of the historical center that had been reconstructed during the war period. This is the part of the historical center that still remained with the old traditional tissue, because it had been burned, so the plan hadn't been implemented in this part of the city. And here we can see the first, the extension towards the eastern. So after the Second World War, which in fact for Greece lasted a little bit longer, because there was also the Civil War just after World War II. So nothing happened until the end of the 40s, until 49, when the Civil War ended. So we would say that the urban development in the post-war period, that is from the 1950s to the 1970s, was marked by two main development patterns. We had high rates of building activity the inner areas of Athens and Thessaloniki with the so-called system of antiparousia. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but in fact, with this system, the owner of a plot provides the developer his plot, and then he gets in return a percentage of the developed property. So, as you can understand, this facilitates the investment of small to medium capital in order to reconstruct the construction. Because you don't have, the developer doesn't have to buy the land, which is the most expensive element in the construction. This led to a rapid reconstruction and very rapid, reconstruction of Athens and Thessaloniki, leading to high densities and mixed-use residential areas, and as relates to the replacement of almost the entire old housing stock, regardless, we could say, of its architectural quality. Here is a plan of the 1962 in Thessaloniki, and you can see all this part, in fact, it's outside of the limit of the refugee settlers of the interwar period, and this is in the 1975. So some images of this mass reconstruction in the inner city that in fact cover the housing needs of the middle, the upper class social strata. So we call it the walls of the polykathikias, because of this very densely built up urban environment that resulted from this procedure. Of course, in order to facilitate the anti-parousia system, a very important element is also to provide high coefficient of construction, because in that case, the developer can give a part of it to the owner, the landowner, and sell the other part in order to get his money back. So the structure of the small landowner city, the inner area of the city, but also in the urban fringes, because of the refugee rehabilitation programs, the high coefficient of construction, and the system of antiparousia marked all this post-war construction that resulted in this very homogeneous urban environment in the Greek cities. And when you go, I mean, okay, you're in the city center, monuments, you can understand where you are, but if you are in a residential area, either you are in Thessaloniki or in Athens, you can distinguish where you are. It's almost the same, right? The polykathikias that have been, I mean, the apartment buildings that have been constructed. Here you can see the major, let's say, change in the urban fabric, not because the plan changed, but because the analogy, the proportion between the built-up areas and the non-built-up areas changed with the antiparousia system. Here we had almost the 100% of the plots covered, but here it's almost 75 or 80% sometimes. And that also, you could say, reversed the whole idea of the grand plans for the historical center, not because it wasn't implemented finally, because it was implemented in terms of the tracement of the axis of the street, of the form of the streets, but not in the proportion of the width of the road and the height of the buildings. This changed after during the post-war construction. So in the contemporary city, which is in fact an urban planning process, because we can find, I mean, within a very densely built up tissue, we can see different monuments dating from different periods, the Byzantine, the Ottomans, the Hellenistic or the Roman monuments. Here, for example, we have the axis that goes from the arch, from the Rotonda through the arch passing by the Galerius Palace. That is Hellenistic and Roman foundings, or along this pedestrian walk that goes from here into the sea. And here's the Galerius Palace with the desert and post-war foundation, or the Forum, but also isolated monuments like, for example, the State or Athina, etc. So, this was the main mode of for reconstructing the iron resilience. What about the expansion? So, as in fact, there are only a very small number of really social housing programs as we know them in Europe. A very small number. Here you can see, for example, there were 8 or 10 because there were 2 more very small that were constructed in the eastern and the western side of the city. This is, for example, one of the biggest one, the Filika social housing project at the beginning of the 60s, which was built at the beginning of the 60s, or the Merkezi social housing again in the 60s. Common, we would say, social housing programs that we find everywhere in the post-war period in Europe. In fact, the main mode of urban expansion was the construction of unauthorized elements in the urban fringe. This is an aerial photo from the western part of the town between 1960 and 1964. You can see that only 4 years the densification, the erection of unauthorized houses without any plan and without, of course, construction permit. So this whole, how do you say, unauthorized settlement process, in fact, covered the housing needs for the low social, for the low-income social strata that were coming from the rural areas, looking for a job in the big urban centers, So through this mode of housing production, extensive residential areas of informal and, as we say, outside of the official plan buildings were formed without any infrastructure, technical, social, etc. And we would say that these neighborhoods were characterized by elementary layouts of blocks. What is striking is that, in fact, all these settlements later on, I mean from the mid-1980s, were in fact rebuilt, were integrated into the urban plans, and little by little, they were more or less, not exactly, but more or less acquired the same, image as the rest of the city, as they were developed also by using the system of anti-barrage and by giving a big coefficient of construction, not so big as the historical center, of course, but anyway, these small informal houses were replaced by polytechnics also from the mid-1980s to the end of the 20th century. As it was the same for the refugee houses, of course. Except for the housing, of course, which forms nevertheless the main body of the city, in the post-war period, there were also 3, we say, major projects that really marked the image of the contemporary city. The one was the construction of the Architectural University of Thessaloniki. The other was the formation of the grounds of the Thessaloniki National Fair, and of course the construction of the new quay as the development of the old quay in the city center. Here is an aerial photo of the mid-1980s, where we can see the concentration of all these big public facilities. And here is the National Fair, here is the university, the campus, and this is in fact the military headquarters that dates back to the end of the 19th century. This is the municipal garden, here is the White Tower, I imagine you know the White Tower. And this was called by some city the Eastern Rift, because in fact it's a kind of rift between the very densely built-up historical center here. You can see the beginning of the center here, and the east extension of the city there. Another photo that maybe illustrates more clearly what I said. Here is the historical center, the rift with all this, you would say, modern movement approach to planning, the big freestanding buildings, and the eastern part is follows again the system of anti-corrosion protecting. So for the university, very quickly, in fact, the first university campus was integrated in the 1980s, in the plan of operation in the 1980s. Here, same, it was very, but as I said earlier, it was redesigned by him in the late 20s in a more detailed manner. Well, in fact, it wasn't implemented in the interwar period because the truth of this area was, well, first, as it was this area in the 19th century, it was an area where the cemeteries of four religions were concentrated, the Muslim cemetery, the Israeli Jewish cemetery here. And after the fire, but also after the arrival of the refugees after the 1923, all this area became an unauthorized refugee settlement. So because of this settlement and also the presence of the Jewish cemetery, which although there were many discussions between the Jewish community and the municipality in order to relocate the cemetery, etc., during the interwar period, that never happened. And it was only during the Nazi occupation period that the cemetery was destroyed. And so here we can see a cadastral plan of the Jewish cemetery with all the areas that afterwards were acquired by the University of SELANÍK. And so a part of it here, it was in fact seized just before the war. So they started to build a part of the university here, just on the north of the old Hamilton building of the 19th century, which today is it belongs to the university. It's the Faculty of Philosophy. But as there was the Second World War, everything stopped. The buildings, even the buildings were have been completely constructed. And so after the Second World War, when the Jewish cemetery had been destroyed, they really began the discussion to complete, say, this university campus. And but they didn't follow the plan, the Brand's plan, that the Brand had designed. But as we were in the post-war period, the modern movement, etc., they adopted this modern movement approach in order to build the university campus. So somewhere we have focused on the area. And we would say that the university campus and the international fair, which is just in the south of the university, were in fact during the first post-war period, in the 60s and the 70s, we could say the laboratories of very interesting and characteristic examples of modern architecture. Well, in the university, they still stand there, not in very good condition, but they are still there. But not the international fair, because most of them were being constructed only temporarily and for each year. Some examples, and that's very quickly in order to have an idea of these university buildings, modern university buildings, and of the international fair of the 20s and the 60s. It's a transition. And lastly, the more, we could say, urban landscape, the UK. In fact, well, Vasilis explained us how in the end of the 19th century they destroyed the wall, the sea wall, and they constructed the OTA. First, the before for 12 meters and then 20 meters. And but the rest of the seashore preserved his natural, say, form. We saw the plan. We saw the plan earlier. until the 50s, until after the Second World War. So in the mid-50s, this discussion about the construction of the new care started again, and they started to reconstruct that, construct it. You can see here the first, the initial plan, with, let's say, a new, a different construction system than the one followed in the historical center, because we have more here a freestanding system of buildings than the one of the urban blocks. And here is also the project option for the now it's a project for the construction of the other half in the 1960s. So this is for the 1950s, so with the first installation Royal Theatre, which was constructed just before the war, and the construction of the UK, the first part of the UK. Here are some images. Also, Vasilis Kolonas showed us some interesting images of the construction of the UK. You see the first part here, and the natural seashore afterwards, because it was constructed later in the mid-1960s. And here is an aerial photo of the 2000, where you can see this whole UK was constructed between the 1990s and the 1970s. Always with great ideas, as I said, with some differences. Right here we have the abilities, we have the freestanding big volcanoes instead of the small ones followed the system in the historical center within the existing extension in the rest of the city. So all this, before this we arrived almost in the mid-1920s, and at that time we have, let's say, the first signs of this discussion on the need to preserve, let's say, the most recent architecture of the 19th century or the 20th century. This is the plan of the SELANÍK in 1980, just to have an idea of the larger scale of the city. So, the discussion started, of course, from the upper town, the upper Poli, which was preserved also according to the plans, but also, of course, no, with the exception of the southern part here, as you can see, where the small houses had been replaced in the 60s and 70s by volcanoes, the rest of the settlement remained untouched. In fact, well, I will show you some previous images in order to understand it. Oh, sure. This is some images of the, in order to see the traditional architecture of the houses in the upper town. Of course, it's the traditional architecture that we can find also in the rest of the Balkans from the Ottoman period. Here is some images of the 1910s. And in fact, with the arrival of the refugees, some parts of the upper town that were built with refugee houses. That is, there was, very better. In fact, during the war period, there was a densification of the parts of the upper town that were built by the mostly unauthorized housing, refugee housing. These, for example, are some houses that were built on the walls surrounding the Acropolis. And in the 1980s, as I told you, in the southern part of the upper town, some of the houses they had been replaced by just not so high, but the type was always quite obvious. And this is a nice view from the upper town towards the lower town of the city. So in the end of the 1970s, there was this discussion about preservation policy from traditional settlements, not only SELANÍK, of course, generally. It started from we would say from the big tourism organization. But from the SELANÍK, it is concerned the upper, mostly the traditional settlement of the upper town. And well, there was in fact a specific presidential decree that was elaborated for the terms of construction terms that they had to be followed in this settlement. But firstly, there were many studies in order to know better the morphological elements of this settlement. And then there was this decree which imposed specific rules for the construction of the houses, for the new houses, but also a very large number of buildings in the upper town were listed and they were since then preserved as monuments of the latest historical period of the city. Well, this, of course, led to the restoration of, especially at the end of the 1990s, because we say that more money flowed in the city as SELANÍK was appointed the cultural capital for European cultural capital in 1997. So there were more money in the city, and most of them that had been bought by foundations or by banks, etc. They have been nicely restorated, we would say. But the decree gave also, say what, following the decree, there was also new constructions that, and this, say, neo-traditional architecture appeared in the city. Don't forget, of course, that we're in the period of the postmodernism, so it's So we had some interesting examples of this neo-traditional, say, technical architecture, but also some very bad examples the upper town. Here is, of course, the upper city is very rich in terms of not only because of the monuments there are all this housing stock of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, but also because we have also interesting natural elements that they should be preserved, like we say natural cultural heritage. And there were many projects in order to preserve this cultural heritage and heritage, etc. Some of them were realized in mostly fragmentary way, we would say, but some of them no. This is some of the another part of the city that had been preserved from the because it was inverted during the 1975. It was the port market, that is the market area near the port, which in fact wasn't preserved according to the Paris plan. So in the mid-1980s, here is the port market area, and here is the historical center, just before the war, and here is this part here that we burned, so the plan had been implemented. In the 1980s, they decided to open the Zinsky Street, House of Food, and also the Vitopoulou Street. Well, the Zinsky Street was praised, but the Vitopoulou no, because there was a big reaction of the architects, of the Association of the Architects of SELANÍK, and also for the experts, the urbanists, etc. And there was a campaign, a study also to understand, to register and say that the morphological elements of this neighborhood. Of course, this wasn't a residential area. This was an area where for trade with commerce, mostly, and small businesses. Most of them were closed because the whole neighborhood were very degraded until the beginning of the 1980s. So finally, what happened? Well, most of these reactions had as a result, first, a very positive thing, that most of the buildings that were still standing were listed as should be preserved. But, well, the negative, we would say, aspect of all this operation was that there wasn't an integrated, we would say, rehabilitation project for this neighborhood. Instead, this was left to the private, we would say, initiative, and so most of these buildings were bought by investors who finally, in order to regain their money, the money of their investment, they turned them into recreational functions. So the whole area, the whole neighborhood, turned to be kind of open, we would say, nightclub, with many restaurants, coffees, clubs, etc. And for a period it worked, for almost a decade, then it went down, and then the late, just before the crisis and after the crisis, we would say that it regained a little bit the interest of the people. And with all this, we arrive at the end of the 20th century, and the beginning of the 21st. So, in fact, in the end of the 20th century, as I said in the beginning, the dispersed development started to be seen mainly from the end of the 1990s, but mostly in the 21st century. In fact, joining the EU and also the opening of the borders after the end of the Cold War, the Eastern Bloc, led also to attracting a number of immigrants to SELANÍK that were installed either in the parts of the historical center, the most degraded parts of the historical center, or again in the periphery of the city, of course. So, we would say that from the mid-1970s until the end of the 20th century, there was a recession in the growth of Athens and Thessaloniki as the small and the medium-sized cities began to recover in terms of population, attracting the rural population of their surrounding areas. So the population of Athens and Thessaloniki remained stable. But the phenomenon of the urban sprawl, so it wasn't due to the population growth, but mostly to the population of the inner city and the willingness of the medium and the upper class to go to the outside to find better living conditions, you could say. So I will pass some plans to see what's been in the city today. This is a plan showing the strong history of the city, some images. It was, in fact, the last decade of the 20th century was the flourishing decade of the malls in the periphery of the city and of the creation of new, say, urban centers. This is in the western periphery. And of course, this is also a plan that shows the transport system, the existing and the proposed. You can see here that the metro line that in fact started to be constructed, it's been 15 years now, and also the sea transport that finally was never implemented, but it's still under discussion today. In fact, the bus network still remains the only public transport system in function today, although Thessaloniki has more than 1 million inhabitants. And so, in terms of the quality of the urban environment, we could say that the contemporary city, well, the positive aspects of it, it's of course the very important natural ecosystem that surrounds the city, the sea, the section forest, the 4 rivers and also the river of the west, an outstanding historical heritage, a mixed-use compact city, which is something positive, you consider new ideas about the development, with active ground floors, because of the mixed use, which of course turns the public spaces very lively. The negative aspects is of course the very densely built up residential areas in many parts of the city, the lack of open green spaces, the heat island effects on the most of the city. So during the summer it's very difficult to walk in the city. And the traffic congestions and the noise, especially in the urban areas and in all main transportations. And of course the pollution problems, air pollution, etc. So, from in the last decade of the 20th century and until the crisis, that is in 2010, there was a number of, let's say, interventions that they tried to ameliorate a little bit the conditions of the public space of the city. One interesting intervention was, in fact, the allocation of a part of the port to the city by rehabilitating in the first phase by just rehabilitating the old warehouses. In fact, this period was constructed in the turn of the 20th century, and in 1904. And then in the 2011, there was also the kind of very, say, minimal project of the public space redesign in this part of the port. They removed all the cars, the vans, etc., the trucks, and they rehabilitated they restored the old stone pavement here, and also they made a deck, a wooden deck there for the people to stay, and some sitting places, and they also planted some olive trees that they don't give any shade, in fact, but at least they turned this whole area more friendly to the visitors, but of course it's better in the night. It's the area where the Thessaloniki Film Festival takes place during every November, in fact. So another intervention was a redesign of the White Tower Square from the 90s. Well, the project was designed in the 1996, and for the Thessaloniki European capital. But it was constructed afterwards, that is at the beginning of the 21st century. Well, I can be good or not. It improved a little bit the situation around the White Tower, especially because it provided sitting places for people, and it's very visited. Another just for the crisis, the construction of the new town hall, which was discussed for 4 decades maybe, was completed, but in plans that they had been made 2 decades earlier, in the 1980s. So a new town hall with a kind of new square in front of it, not a real square, also the light, and also another very famous building. It was the new music hall that was designed by Arayişindaki and Associates at the SELANİK Hall, next to the old opera house. So, in order to ameliorate and to promote the sustainable mobility in the city, we had also the construction of the first bicycle lane along the seashore just in 2001, the first 3 kilometers, and then until 2009 another 12 kilometers, and also the introduction of this shared bike system. And then the crisis came in 2010, and everything stopped. And it was, in fact, for 1 decade, it was a very difficult period, not for Thessaloniki, but for the whole country. In fact, the period between 1995 and 2010 is characterized, I would say, by the rhetoric and deficient implementation of a major urban renewal strategy, where public space plays a key role in achieving urban restructuring and overall improvement of the image of the city. But because of the, you could say, fragmented financing, often by different sources and financing programs, that is from the central government bodies or the EU, etc., resulted in the postponement or the partial implementation or the improvements of the encouragement, you could say, of large-scale projects dominating the agenda of local authorities. So, and then the crisis came also, and there was, I would say, many changes, not only in the image of the city. For example, the public space was even more degraded than before, because there were no money to invest in it. Although there was a return of the people in the city center, say, because of course you didn't have any money to go their cars to go in the new urban centers in the periphery, or in the big malls in the periphery. And also the crisis had a a big impact on the mobility behavior of people. But at least there was a decrease in the use of the car, there was an increase in the use of buses, although the bus system is not the best in the world, of course, it's the opposite. And also the modes of soft mobility, that is cycling, walking, etc., they improved and the percentages of it. So this was the positive, we could say, aspect of the crisis, and here we can see the negative, of course, implications of the crisis. Here with black, we can see all the closed premises and commerce along the main artery, that is from the airport to the city center, that is along the Queen Avenue, which was in fact the street conversation along which was around area. So, during this period, we didn't have the implementation of big projects, with the exception of the renovation, the redesign, renovation of the retail that started before the crisis, images. So, during this period, we would say that the municipality was mostly concentrated in small-scale street redesign projects that didn't need a lot of money and could be done quickly. One of the, I would say, but they were, except of this number of small-scale innovations, there was also innovation for which there was also a competition, etc. But the specialization of a major street, important traffic in the city center of Sofia Street, which was made first. It was made in a permanent, we would say, way, a temporary way, adopting simple design strategies. They were very. They used a lot in Europe, everywhere, worldwide. So here is a picture from these states where with very low cost elements and you change the speed before implementing the project. This is some images of these small-scale, street-scale design projects in residency neighborhoods during the crisis, but also in the city center. Another very interesting, I would say, element in the urban is that from the beginning of the 21st century, there were many citizens' initiatives that started to flourish in the city, non-profit organizations about walking, about bicycling, but they started also to resist and to reclaim public space for the citizens. Another type of interventions was in fact that they were funded by a certain financing tool from the European Union. That's the 2 or 3 interventions that were made for the variety market upgrading of public spaces. This one concerns in fact the building market upgrade of this whole area. This is the Latarta area, as I showed you earlier, and this is the outlet of Latarta. In fact, it concerned the neighborhood that was already, we would say, in the process of certification, of spontaneous certification since the 1990s, because there were, well, most of the owners in the small businesses were there, they started to close, some who know groups, artist groups, musicians, etc. They were finding their premises with very low, with little money, so it was easy for them to find a place there for, etc. And also the first recreational activities started to appear, parks, so just before the crisis, there was to make a whole project for the area that mostly concerned the public space, not the building. And in order to acquire the money, in fact, the whole project, which was made by the Department of Architectural Projects of the municipality, really concerned the change of the material and the pavement, and the plantations, all the use of certain, rather peculiar sometimes, modes to refresh the air in the area, just to have with this model that they run, in order to show that the temperature, the air temperature got decreased 3 degrees. So I don't know, maybe there are some, for example, this thing is to refresh the air in this, kind of air condition, not an air condition, just to refresh the air in the area. So the project mostly, what did they do? In fact, they worked with the sidewalks, which right away were joined by the, of course, for the cafes and the restaurants. Not pedestrianized, but they imposed slow traffic. They turned the roads to slow traffic streets. And of course, they redesigned these 2 squares, the Arayişindaki Square and Mimarlık Square, so as to provide more space for people to walk, for the pedestrians. And of course, they took away all the parking blocks that they were in the area. Another type of this kind of innovation was in fact, the continuation of the pedestrian walk that starts from the Rotonda Arts Galerius complex and was fencing there, and they decided to continue it until the sea. And well, it was again integrated in this kind of financing for the bioclimatic upgrading of the public space, and it was funded. But this time it wasn't funded by the EU, but from a private foundation, that is the MİMARLIK Foundation, because during the crisis also this tendency appeared, that is the foundations and the rich people to give money in order to make urban interventions, like in the 19th century. We went back, in fact. What else? Well, but the major and the most successful urban intervention at the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, was the new Kerry design that started in 2001 and finished in 2013. It was financed by 2 different successive financial tools for the basis for the municipalities, from the EU, of course. And well, it has become, it was always one of the most important and the biggest, we would say, public space in the city, of course, the UK. But it had been degraded with the years. The material was very degraded. It wasn't easy to walk, to make this walk during the day in the summertime, because there weren't many plantation trees at the end. So they know this is, for example, the UK in the 1990s. And this is after the redesign and the renovation of the UK. I'll pass quickly, very quickly, the pros like time for another 10 minutes. It's a linear public space. The main idea is the creation of parts. In fact, the one part is the linear walking with the introduction of this alley which facilitated people working during the day, especially when it's hot, and also the other half of the week is dedicated to the creation of a number of thematic gardens. And this is during the night. So, in order to finish, I don't know, can I have 5 more minutes or no? No. I can stop here if you want. I just wanted to say that, in fact, the main planning and design issues and challenges for the city tomorrow and for the future city, it's one major discussion that started 30 years ago. It's the reuse of the former military camps. Currently, it's under transformation. The former camp of the Pavlos Melas in the western periphery of the city, they try to turn it into a metropolitan park. The development plan for the grounds of the SELANÍK International Fair, another discussion since the 60s, but now a special plan has been prepared. There was also an architectural competition, but we are not sure if it's going to be implemented because there is an appeal that was made to the state of Council of the State because there were many reactions against it. Also, the reclaim and enhancement of urban streets. All these three are very important, we would say, for the strengthening of the green infrastructure of the city. Of course, the metro construction, which started 15 years ago and still doesn't work. Now they say 24, we're going to see. And finally, the waterfront regeneration from the western to the eastern legs. I mean, not only the old and the new Kent, but from the one side of the bed to the other side of the bed. So very quickly, actually the discussion about the relocation of the military camps and the reuse, the renovation of them in order to construct all the necessary public services, but also to create major public spaces in the city. Started in the 1960s, then it became resurfaced in the 1920s, and then also in the 1980s, and then also all the general urban plans for the municipalities in the 1920s, they were, predicted major equipment installed in this, located in this, all these camps, and they were integrated in the city, in fact, already at the time. But in fact, only some partial transformations were made, little by little, some piecemeal, say, transformations in order to construct sportive activities, etc. To arrive until today, that we have the first, we could say, integrated operation of military camp conversion. This is the first preliminary study that was made by the municipality of Pavlos Melas in order to turn the former military camp into a metropolitan park. This is the special spatial plan that, in fact, is a new planning tool that was introduced to the crisis in order to facilitate the planning procedures. In fact, it allows to implement functions in the exception of the ones that they are in the approved general plans. This is the latest architectural competition about the replanning, the redesign of these three parts of the metropolitan park, and the first prizes that we just seen the light just before the summer. Well, the discussion about the International Fair World Expo, as I told you, dates back to the 1960s. They wanted to relocate it, to turn it to the metropolitan park. This discussion came in also in the 1980s, at the beginning of the 2000s. Even Calatrava made a proposition for this. But it was just at the 2017 that there was a preliminary study and then a special spatial plan that was prepared for that. But in fact, made us to believe that no Metropolitan Park was going to be there because it introduces a high coefficient of construction for new buildings for the Expo, and it leaves only a small part here for the kind of park or kind of public space, which is in fact not public space because they don't give it to the municipality, it always belongs to the. And this is the architectural competition that they have done for the Expo Center, call it. And as you can see, as it was based on the special plan and the construction that was that it provides, so you can see it's very densely built out. It looks like a certain part of it looks like a garden. Of course, there are streams that I told earlier, but there is a growing discussion on that. Of course, like in every moving city, they were canalized. Well, the city was full of streams, of urban streams that were coming down from the forest towards the sea. They were all canalized during the war and the post-war period. And nowadays, we are trying to preserve them. And also, as you can see, this strategic plan that was prepared in the beginning of the 2000, all the military sites, and of course, the grounds of the International Fair and all the urban streams are very important elements for the infrastructure of the city. But the latest projects that are prepared, they are not, they don't follow, say, this strategic plan. Metro, this is another lost opportunity, we would say, for the city because it was only planned like transport infrastructure, and the urban implications, in the uses, in the areas where there are stations, or the urban design of the areas around the station haven't been discussed yet. So it's another lost opportunity, and the Metropolis is the developer. The only thing that it does when the station finishes is to give the same form as it was before. So nobody knows what's going to happen in areas like this, that they are in the fringe of the city, in the western and the eastern edge of the city, where normally we should have either special plans for this or design competitions for the design of public spaces. And I will say only pass on this, and I will just say a few words about small sentence about the waterfront, and I will stop there because I have exhausted you. Well, there was a discussion for the construction of another water artery since the 1960s. Well, in 1960s it was a very ambitious plan in order to make a ring road around the city, and the underwater artery was there and the extension today. Well, this was not implemented, of course. Afterwards, in the late 1990s, there was a proposition to make an extension in the old city, and pass another water artery underneath. This was not implemented because there were many reactions here. And this was the latest project from the dates of the 2004, that it was ready to be constructed with another water artery here, coming down in the port area, following the old quay without an extension or a small extension, and getting out here in the big Seashore Boulevard. So, as there were many reactions, and there were groups of ecological groups and also groups of citizens that appealed to the state, the Council of the State, finally, and also because of financial problems. Finally, the whole project had been realized. And now, and then there was the implementation of this redesign project for the new year, and also the latest, say, this design project for the old year is there was a competition, and this is the first prize that finally we are going to just make a small deck, in front of the historical center, Square East, and but at the same time, the whole adventure on the seafront goes on with the preparation of the special spatial plan, which in fact starts from the mouth of the river Delta until the mouth of the river this year. It contains some of the some areas of very important ecological value, like here, agricultural land, the mouth of the rivers, etc. You see that the old key and the new key were inside this project. But, well, there was a first publication of the special plan. There were many reactions, because in fact it boosted the building and not the protection of all these areas. And now we are in the phase that they were making some approvals, and they are going to be, there is going to be a second publication of the special plan, and we're going to see what's going on with the civil. It's a pity fact that they don't take in mind the fact that these concerns areas of very high ecological value. That's the main problem, and that we have already a very densely built up city, and that the only thing that we should do is to strengthen the elements of the green and blue infrastructure, because otherwise the city is going to be unviewable. And with this, I sorry, didn't realize. Yes, now we know everything about the SELANÍK.
It's your turn, if you want.